All right, welcome to part three of our introduction to high leverage practices, explicit instruction, and writing conditions for IEP goals. Just a reminder that after every video segment, I encourage you to check your understanding, and the last part of your participation document will be your questions. Make sure that you add those questions every week if you have any, okay? Because we will review those and I'll make sure that I clarify those in class. All right, we're ready to start talking about the characteristics of explicit instruction. And this is going to be a big overview of explicit instruction and some of the components of explicit instruction. So what I'm going to do now, this is where those 6 steps of effective instruction come in. So now you're going to get what I asked you about at the beginning of the first video. And so what I'm going to do is, again, giving you just a big overview, I'm going to go through these. And these steps occur in this order. After this, I'm going to show you a graphic of it that makes it a little easier to see that you can take a screenshot of. So the first thing you're going to do is when you are planning your instruction, very first thing you do is that you are going to analyze the standards and you're going to select the ones that your students need to learn for. So the very first thing you do is you start with that standard. What do you want students to learn in the end? Once you've decided what you're going to teach them, what skill, what standard you're going to teach, then you need to make sure that you determine what assessment you're going to use, and you're going to assess your students and then analyze the data that you get because you need to know where your students currently are. Do they have the prerequisite skills needed for whatever standard you're going to teach, or do you need to go back and pick some of those up in order for them to be prepared? So you've chosen your standard. Now you have assessed your students to determine where they are. You've analyzed the results. You got a real clear picture of your students' present level of performance. So standards, then assessment. Then once you've done that, now that you know where your students are, you need to write your goals and break those down into objectives. So I know where my students are. I can see what they have and where they need to go, or I can see where they have these gaps or lack of prerequisite skills, and I'm going to plan my goals based on that. So you would write your goals and then break them down into objectives. So remember, your goal is that broad thing, that big skill that you want your students to learn, and those objectives are the small teachable parts of it that you're going to teach that are going to lead to that bigger goal. So think about the goal again, addition within 20, and then those objectives were between 5, 10, and 15 addition. Now that I know my standard, I've done my assessment, I've written my goals, now I need to be able to progress monitor. That means I need to develop a tool, or I need to find a tool, some type of assessment tool that I'm going to use to progress monitor and assess my students. And I'm going to do that consistently over time. And I'm going to do it on a schedule. So, for example, I'm going to give a spelling test every week. I'm going to do a quiz that's related to comprehension questions at the end of every reading, and we do a reading twice a week, for example. Now that you know your standard, you've done your assessment, you've got your goal, your progress monitoring, now it's time for you to design your lesson. And as always, we're going to make sure that we're using evidence-based practices, we're using high leverage practices, and that we're using explicit instruction. Now that we're doing that, we're going to continue to evaluate our students. We're going to look at their progress. We're going to make data-based decisions based on the data we collect during progress monitoring. So again, our students are doing well. We're going to continue to move on. Our students are not making progress. We're going to make some adaptations or changes to our instruction, the materials or the supports that we're using. So again, when you're looking at that, and this is the graphic that I was telling you about with a star up there in the quarter. First thing you do, determine what standard you're going to teach. You're going to teach. What am I going to teach? Then you're going to do an assessment of your students. You're going to analyze those results. From those results, you're going to determine what their goals are going to be and break it down into objectives if needed. You're going to progress monitor your students. You're going to identify what or develop the tool you're going to use, and you're going to do it on a schedule. So you're regularly collecting data. Once you've done that, you're going to design design your lessons and implement it using explicit instruction. And always, 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 you are going to make data-based decisions that are individualized for the student. And that data is what's going to drive your instruction. It's going to inform your instruction. I do want to let you know that if you take the final, one of the things that you do in the final is that you describe these steps to effective instruction. So just as a reminder is that this is the order in which you plan your lessons. Now you will notice down here at the bottom, we've got the arrows going back and forth. That's because you implement your instruction, you collect data on your students, you analyze that data, and then you make data-based decisions, and that informs your instruction. You implement that instruction, you collect data on your students' progress, you analyze that data, you make data-based decision. That is a cycle that you will go through over and over again. So again, super important. This is information that we will go deep into throughout the semester. I just want you to have a view of what it is. We'll go through each one of these parts one at a time. So why do evidence-based practices, high leverage practices, and explicit instruction matter? Well, they matter because students with disabilities have better outcomes when we use research-based strategies. Not only that, you as a teacher are going to be responsible in many cases to to choose what instructional strategy you're going to use, and it is required to be backed by evidence and research. That is part of your job as a special education teacher. In addition to that, it's like I said before, those high leverage practices, evidence-based practices, and explicit instruction all work together. That is what's known as an instructional cycle. And they are like best buddies, man. They work together, they stick together, and the result is really powerful learning. In class, we are going to play a game, remember, called Would Anita Archer Approve? And so be prepared for that. And you can be prepared for that by paying attention throughout our video. All right, now we're going to talk about those characteristics of explicit instruction. We're going to go through each one of these individually. So one thing is that explicit instruction is systematic. It is relentless. It is engaging, and it is successful. And so what does that even mean? What am I talking about? Well, we're going to get into that now. So we're going to start, and this video is going to be about explicit instruction is systematic. So that's what this whole video is going to be about. We'll go through components of systematic. What does it mean if it's systematic? Well, it focuses only on the critical content. We don't have time to be teaching students things that don't matter or that aren't important to us right now. We've got to get that critical content because we need to know that what they learn now is going to be built on in the next grade, in the next unit, in the next lesson. And that instructional time is limited and it is precious. So you have to prioritize what skills and concepts you're going to teach and only teach the most important content. And that focusing on that content is a direct support to student success. Because if I'm teaching you what you need to know, that makes it easier and more efficient for you to learn than if I'm giving you a bunch of extraneous information that doesn't matter. So it matters because it is more efficient. And again, it focuses your instruction on those targeted skills. So you need to ask yourself, does this activity directly support my learning goal? And if it does not support your learning goal, we probably don't have time for that. In fact, we do not have time for that because our instructional time is so limited. Again, talking about explicit instruction being systematic, what you do is you break those complex skills into smaller chunks. Remember, we take that broad skill and break it into smaller teachable steps because it's easier to learn when we teach in smaller steps for our students. So you break that complex skill into those teachable parts, and then students master one part at a time before they move on to the next part. So we're going to learn again, addition through 5, before we move to addition to 10. And once you master addition within 5, only then are we going to move to addition within 10. So think about it this way. Chunk that information so students learn it and remember it. Again, that's called chunking. We're breaking it into small chunks. So let's talk about chunking content. Again, breaking it down, making it stick. And that's just taking that large information and making it into smaller teachable parts so that it increases students' learning, their understanding, their long-term retention. So here's an example of teaching the water cycle without chunking. It can be overwhelming. It can be hard to remember. Here we go, the water cycle. The sun heats water in oceans, lakes, and rivers, causing it to evaporate into water vapor. The water vapor rises into the atmosphere where it cools and condenses into tiny droplets forming clouds. When the droplets in the clouds become too heavy, they fall to the ground as precipitation, such as rain and sleet and snow and hail, and the water catches in rivers and lakes and oceans, and the cycle begins again. Whew. That was a lot. That's hard to remember. That's hard to take in. But you can imagine that if you chunk it and you get these clear, manageable parts, they're easier to remember. So first, let's talk about evaporation. Once we've got evaporation down, then let's learn about condensation. Now we've got evaporation and condensation. Once we've got those, we're ready to move on to precipitation, etc. So you can see how chunking it makes it easier for students not only to learn, but to remember because it reduces the cognitive load. It's not as overwhelming. It improves understanding because they learn these chunks, but they can see those chunks in the bigger picture and how each of those parts connect. How do each of these parts connect to the water cycle? And it improves retention because it's easier to remember. So think about this. Chunking it helps students learn it, and it helps students remember it. So, number 4, for your participation, you're going to do some chunking. You're just giving it a try. As always, when we're doing these participation, you're just trying it out. So what you're going to do is you're going to practice breaking a skill down into smaller teachable parts that are more meaningful and easier for students to learn. So the first thing I want you to do is to brainstorm. If you were teaching someone, for example, they just got a puppy, and you were teaching them how to care for that dog, the first thing I want you to do is to brainstorm all of the skills you would need to teach them. What are all the things you need to be able to do to take care of a dog? And then I want you to chunk it. I want you to group those skills into chunks that are easier for the student to learn, and then give them like a title so you can see what that chunk might be. So for example, one of the chunks might be exercise, and then list what you would need to teach the individual about taking care of a dog under that. All right, do the best you can. We're just trying it. Remember, when you get the opportunity for active engagement, helps you learn, helps you retain, helps you generalize, and that's what we're doing now. So not only are you going to get an opportunity to do that chunking activity now, I didn't tell you to stop the video, but stop it and come back. You're also going to have an opportunity to do that in class with a peer. And when you do it with a peer, you're going to get to pick that skill. It could be brushing the teeth. It could be looking for videos on gaming hacks, learning how to cook eggs, scrambled eggs, or something like cleaning up your room. That's going to be your opportunity to choose the skill that you want to teach, and it can be anything. All right, so now we're going to move to scaffolding. We talked about scaffolding a little bit, so let's talk about it a little bit more, and we'll continue to work on this. We'll have like a whole week where we're talking about scaffolding. But when we're talking about explicit instruction being systematic, scaffolding is a really important part of that. And remember, when we're in that we do, that guided practice, we're going to really be focusing on scaffolding for our students. And really what scaffolding is it's temporary assistance. Hear that again. It is temporary assistance because we want to help a student perform a skill or accomplish a task before they're able to do it independently. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start by providing them with high support, and we're going to gradually reduce that support. That's called fading. You'll hear fading in special education, but we're going to fade that support as the student gains confidence and becomes proficient in the skill. So scaffolding means, again, temporary assistance, and you might start with high support. I'm going to provide you with a lot of support. Once I'm providing with you a lot of support, oh, look, you're starting to get this. Look, when I provide you with support, you can complete the task. Now I'm going to back off from high support. I'm going to give you moderate support. Moderate support. Oh, whoa, look, you're able to do the task with moderate support. Let me fade more. Now I'm going to go to low support. I'm going to support you with low support now because remember, all of it's temporary. Once you're confident and you're proficient with low support, now I'm going to move to no support. And so scaffolding, again, we often see that, and I expect to see it in we do the guided practice, and you're going to fade it out to independence, and that's when students will move to you do. See how all this starts fitting together? And so when we're thinking about scaffolding, we might provide something like a task analysis, and we're going to scaffold by teaching you the first steps in the task analysis. I'm going to teach you the first two, and I'm going to support you heavily on the rest, or then I'm going to support you heavily on the rest of them. Then I'm going to teach you three, and then I'm going to support you heavily on the rest of them, for example. Another example of scaffolding is chunking. You might initially start chunking, and you're going to give them really, really small amounts, and then we're going to gradually increase the content, the information, the skill that we expect a student to perform. It could be that you're modeling step by step, and then suddenly you're modeling all steps, and then I'm moving from 10 steps till I'm only modeling 9 of the steps. Now I'm only modeling 8 of the steps, and I expect you to do the other steps independently. And again, in guided practice, we always are going to see that scaffolding starting with high level of support, fading to low, and then no support before we move in to independent practice or expect students to perform skills independently. And remember, by scaffolding, what we want to do is those smaller chunks reduce the cognitive load and improve our learning, because goodness knows we don't want to overwhelm our students and have them looking like this little penguin down here. All right, so here's an example of scaffolding. If I were teaching, let's talk to our birth to 5-year old emphasis area students. If I'm teaching a student to feed themselves independently, or we're just introducing solid foods and we're doing bananas, I might start, this is my scaffolding, I'm going to start by mashing the banana. That's high support. Then I'm going to go lessen that support. I'm going to fade it to, now I'm cutting it into small chunks. Now I'm going to fade that to, I'm giving you the banana cut, but it has a peel around it. Now I'm going to fade that to, I'm giving you a banana, you're taking the peel off and you're eating a banana whole. So again, going from mash to whole, and you can see how we scaffolded in between. All right, so explicit instruction is systematic because it teaches skills in a logical order. Here's what we need to think about. We want to teach easy skills before we teach hard skills. That makes sense, right? We want to teach those easy ones because because they're easier. They're easier for us to teach and for students to learn, but we also want to provide students with that success before we move on to harder skills. You want to make sure that you teach the prerequisite skills first. I can't teach you addition within 20 if you don't know addition within 5. I have to teach you the prerequisite skills first because I'm teaching in a logical sequence. You want to teach high frequency skills, skills that students are going to use often before you teach those skills that they're not going to use as often. For example, I'm going to teach you high frequency words before I teach you low frequency words. And this is another important thing, is we're going to teach similar skills separately, because when you teach similar skills together, it can confuse students. So by teaching similar skills separately, it reduces confusion. So here is an example of logical sequencing. First, I'm going to teach you your letter sounds. Once you know your letter sounds, then I'm going to teach you to read words. After I teach you to read words, then I'm going to teach you to read sentences. After I teach you to read sentences, then you're going to learn to read stories. Because it'd be really confusing if I did it in the opposite order. That's not a logical sequence to start with reading a story and end with letter sounds. So again, the importance of teaching skills in a logical sequence is part of that systematic explicit instruction. So why does that sequence even matter? Because students learn better when skills build one on another. You can see building addition within 5, addition within 10 builds on addition within 5. Instruction progresses from things that are simple to things that are more difficult and complex. You can think about that across grades, for example. And when we teach in a logical sequence, again, that minimizes confusion, but it also helps you as a teacher monitor students' understanding. So if I teach in a logical sequence, I can tell early on that there's a skill that you have a gap in, or there's a misunderstanding, a misconception, and I can catch that early before I start teaching that more complex skill. So there are things you need to watch for. Are your students confused? Are they frustrated? Are they disengaged? These are things that you want to look for to make sure that you are teaching in a logical sequence, because if students are frustrated or confused, they may be missing those prerequisite skills. All right, we're going to stop right there. We'll come back and talk about systematic instruction some more in the next video. Systematic explicit instruction. All right, I'll see you in the next video.